To kick off 2023, Lucy and I want to do a 365 project. Every day for the whole year in 2023, we're going to make a picture and post it on Instagram. We'll share our new Instagram account with you in the description below so you can follow along our journey if you want to. It's that time of year where everyone's sick, so last night I had the idea to make a photo of Lucy sitting in between two giant piles of crumpled up tissues. I didn't want to waste 5 boxes of tissues making these huge piles, so I actually made some props. I glued together a couple of cardboard pyramids and then glued crumpled up tissues to the pyramids to make it look like we had a couple of pile of tissues. So we thought we'd make this behind the scenes, show you how we made our props, and take you through some of the actual shooting. Let's go see what we've got. Okay, so this is the scene. We've got our camera over here. We've got our dog on the ground watching over everything. We've got Lucy set up here. She looks all sick and horrible. For lighting, we have an overhead light on a big umbrella, and that makes a really cool downlight. And then to fill it in, we've got another umbrella over there that kind of replicates window light. And then you'll also notice I've got this black V-flat over here, and this is to prevent the shadows from casting too much on the wall. So when we actually make the image, it lights Lucy and the scene really well, but it doesn't cast too much of a light on our background. So to get started, I'm going to do a couple of things here. I'm actually going to turn my flash off. I'm going to take a picture of Lucy so that you can see what it looks like with just ambient light. And you can see here that Lucy there's pretty much nothing there. You can kind of see a faint outline and a little bit of those tissues, but for the most part, this scene is dark. Now I'm gonna pop my flashes on, and I'm gonna do them one at a time, and then I'll show you what they look like all together. So first is just the overhead light. So that's how it looks with the overhead light. Now we'll add just our fill light. There's our fill. And here's what it looks like with everything together. It's a pretty good image. So now that we have our lighting all set up properly, I'm actually just gonna spend some time with Lucy now, and we're gonna go through and do our shoot. Okay, we wanted to give you an up-close tour of our scene here. So you can see we've got these two great big giant piles of tissues. Lucy, can you turn that around so we can show everyone? There we go, yep. So you can see I just cut these triangles out of cardboard, 3 equal-sized triangles, and I hot glued them together to make a pyramid. And then I individually glued all of the tissues to 2 sides of it. We didn't have to do all 3 because the back side's not going to be facing the camera. And then I did them different sizes as well. So this one's a little bit smaller, but it's the same exact thing.
And it doesn't have a top?
Yeah, it doesn't have a top. It looks really gross. I feel like if I touch it, I'm going to get snot all over me. And then the rest was just, you know, impromptu. We crumpled up some tissues. Some of those are real because Lucy does have the sniffles right now.
Yeah.
So some of them are real, and then the rest was just working on posing. This overhead light that we used up here, that casts really great shadows that make Lucy actually look pretty sick in the photo. It looks pretty awesome. And then again, we've got the bigger umbrella over there for some fill, and the V-flat there to stop the fill light from spilling onto the background, so it's a little bit darker, a little bit more moody. So that's it. How do you feel?
Snotty.
Snotty. All right.
As a matter of fact.
The only thing that's left now is to go and Photoshop our image. So we'll work on that. Okay, so now that we've finished taking our photograph, we're gonna edit the photo now. It's going to be a two-step process. First, we're going to go into Lightroom and do some basic adjustments, and then we're going to take the photo right into Photoshop for some final touches. So let's get started. I've got my image loaded up here in Lightroom already. The first thing that I start with every photograph is to enable profile corrections and remove chromatic aberration. Next, I'm going to go all the way back up to the treatment panel. And I always like to start with auto. I think that Lightroom does a pretty good job of getting my exposure pretty close to where I want it. Next, I'm going to go into my tone curve here, and I'm going to give this just a slight S curve. So I'm going to bring the shadows down a little bit. I'm going to bring the highlights up a little bit, give it a little bit more of a pop. So I'll turn that on and off. You can see what that looks like. Now, overall, this is a pretty dark image. You can see that I've got some pretty deep shadows here in Lucy's hair. So to adjust that, I'm going to go back up to the treatment panel, and I'm going to boost my shadows a little bit more so that I can bring out some of that detail. That looks pretty good to me. The last thing that I'm going to do here in Lightroom is adjust the color temperature just a smidge, just to get Lucy's skin tone looking a little bit more natural. I'm pretty happy with that. So now I'm going to right click and edit in Photoshop. Now there are a few things that I want to do here in Photoshop. One, I'd like to darken the background as well as desaturate it. You can see here we have some color casting up in the corner. And that's just a byproduct of the light reflecting off of the brown tile that we have on the floor here, as well as the brown table. The other thing that we would like to do is clean up a few of the blemishes on Lucy's skin. I don't like to do a lot. Lucy has pretty good skin overall, but we can see she has some marks here on her skin, so we're going to clean those up. Next, we're going to do some dodging and burning on the skin to even out the light. Well, the lighting setup that we had here with the overhead light and the side light, it creates a little bit of uneven light fall off on Lucy's skin and makes it look a little bit unnatural, so I'm going to clean up some of that. And then finally, we're going to make Lucy look a little bit sicker. And this is the real reason we're here in Photoshop in the first place. When you're sick and you're blowing your nose a lot, your nose gets red, your eyes might be a little red. So we're gonna add in some of those colors to Lucy's skin tone. So let's get started. First thing I'm gonna do is adjust the background. So I'm gonna use the select tool, excuse me. I'm gonna select the sky. So that's selected. Everything that's not my subject, you can see a little bit of the mask is off here, but that's okay because we're going to fix that in a moment. Now I'm going to go to my adjustment layer, and I'm going to go to hue saturation, and I'm going to desaturate this. Before we move on to the next step, let's go in and fix our mask. So to do this, I'm going to select the mask on my hue saturation layer, and I'm going to use a soft brush, flow and opacity of 100%. I'm going to use black as the color, and I'm going to paint on here on these tissues where I don't want that desaturation to take place. Okay, paint that out. I noticed a little bit of it up here as well. So if I toggle this layer on and off, we can see there's a little bit of desaturation here in these tissues, where Photoshop thought it was part of my background. All right, now I'm going to command click on this mask because I want to create another layer with the same mask. I'm going to go back to my adjustment layers, and I'm going to create a brightness and contrast. And here I'm going to drag the brightness down to around whatever looks good to me. 35 looks pretty good. Great, so I'm going to group these now. I'm going to rename them to background adjustments. Now I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this one Blemish. I'm going to zoom in here. And what I'm going to do now is clean up some of those spots on Lucy's skin. I'm going to use the spot healing tool, spot healing brush tool. Since I'm doing this on a separate layer, you want to make sure that you have sample all layers selected. And now I'm just going to go around and hit every blemish that I see that isn't naturally occurring. I don't want to remove things like freckles that are part of Lucy's actual face, but I do want to clean up some of these areas of things that aren't always there. I'm not going to go crazy. This isn't a close-up portrait. A lot of these details will be lost when you're looking at the photo from far away. But I do want to clean up some of the bigger ones. If we wanted to, we could also use the spot healing brush here to remove all these wisps of hair in Lucy's face, but it was actually intentional that we had that hair there. We wanted Lucy's hair to look messy because she's supposed to be sick in this photo. Okay, I think that's pretty good for the blemishes. So we're going to move on to the next part. So now we want to even out the lighting across Lucy's face. So to do that, we're going to dodge and burn. And I learned a new trick recently on how to dodge and burn using curves. So I'm going to create a new curves layer. I'm going to call this one Dodge. And when you're dodging an image, you're actually making that area brighter. So I'm going to grab my midtones and pull them up a little bit. I'm going to click back on this mask and I'm going to invert it. And to add this effect, we're actually going to paint with white over that layer mask to bring in that effect. I'm going to duplicate that layer. I'm going to call this one Burn. Invert my layer mask for a moment. And when you burn, you're darkening an image. So we're just going to take that midpoint and we're going to drag it down to about there. Let me go back and invert that layer mask. I'm going to group these now and call this group Dodge and Burn. Now I'm going to create a couple of helper layers. The first helper layer is just to make it black and white. And then the next helper layer is going to be a curves, and we're going to call this one Contrast. I'm going to group these together and call them Helper. So the reason we use these helper layers is when we make it black and white, it only allows us to see areas of the photo that are light and dark. So it helps us focus in on the areas we want to adjust. And then with the contrast layer, what we do is we crunch the blacks and we bring up these whites. And you can see here now, this looks pretty awful. I'm also going to make this layer overlay. All right, so that looks pretty awful, but it helps to really highlight where the light and dark areas on Lucy's skin are uneven or have unnatural transitions. So as we work through this dodge and burn, we're going to be adjusting our curve in the contrast quite a bit to identify areas that we want to adjust. This looks pretty good. I'm going to focus just on the forehead area to begin with. And again, I just want to even out those skin tones. So what I'm going to do is select the mask on my dodge layer. I want to make sure white is my foreground. I want to use a soft brush. So you can see here I have the hardness set to 0. And we're going to put the flow at 1%. One thing that I want to call out here, I am using a Wacom tablet, which helps give me more control than a standard mouse would. So because I'm using a tablet, I'm going to use pen pressure for the opacity, which means the harder that I press, the greater the opacity. And then on the flow, I want to enable airbrush style buildup effects. Okay, so let's go in and start painting in this area. So what I'm going to start with is dodging the darker areas of Lucy's forehead. This is really subtle. It's kind of time consuming, to be honest. We don't have to do a lot to Lucy's skin. This picture is pretty good the way it is. Just slowly dodging the darker areas. I'm trying to get all the color to be about the same. Or all the light, I'm sorry. We're working with a black and white helper layer, so there is no color. Get rid of all those harsh transitions. And I'm going to jump over to my burn layer. I'm going to reduce my brush size and focus on some of these areas where there's brighter highlights. Just trying to make it all around the same on her forehead. So let me turn this helper layer off. And then I'll toggle the dodge and burn on and off so you can see the effect that we're getting here. Nice, even skin tones. So that's pretty good on the forehead. I'm going to move down to the nose now. What I'm noticing now, when I toggle this layer on and off, it kind of stops harshly right about her eyebrow because I haven't put any work in there yet. So let me even out those skin tones next. Now that we're working with our dodge and burn, I'm starting to see there's some other blemishes that I can probably clean up. So we might jump back to that layer, if I remember at the end. I'm going to burn some of this highlight here. Really subtle. That's looking much better already. Okay, let's move down now to the cheek area. So we can see here, what I'm noticing is she has a really bright highlight here on her cheek, here on her lip, and it doesn't transition very smoothly. So what I want to do is I'm going to start by burning the brighter cheek area. Just a little bit. And down here on the lip. Okay, and then I'm going to jump over to my dodge. I'm going to brighten some of the shadow area. Make the transition a little bit lighter. I'm painting very gently. Really not trying to apply too much too fast. I'm going to jump over to her other cheek now. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to burn some of the brighter highlights here. And then we're going to dodge some of the shadows. I think that's looking pretty good. Let's zoom out, turn our helper layer off, toggle this dodge and burn on and off. That looks great if you ask me. Like I mentioned before, Lucy doesn't need a lot of work here. We don't need to do a ton of airbrushing. This isn't some huge commercial project, but we do want to make her skin tone look nice. Okay, the next section I'm going to work on is down here in her chin. So you can see here, the way the light was, really kind of highlighted this wrinkle in Lucy's chin and made some really sharp shadows here under her lip. So we're going to soften those a little bit. I'm going to accentuate my contrast here. Really help me narrow in. I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to burn some of the brighter areas. I'm going to dodge these deep shadows here. Now it looks to me like there's actually no detail that I can recover in some parts of these shadows, so I can't push this too much or it's going to look really unnatural. Pop my helper layer off, toggle this on and off. That's looking pretty good to me. I think I might be able to do a little bit more down here. Maybe. It's looking pretty good. I think this area over here, right on Lucy's left cheek, could use a little bit of adjustment here. Not a lot. It's just that the transition is a little bit stark for me. So I'm going to burn some of these highlights. Again, we're just trying to make it an even transition. Honestly, that might have been enough right there. Oh, that's looking pretty good. Okay, so I think that does it for Lucy's skin tone. That's looking really nice to me. I'm really happy with this. So now what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to select both of these layers and duplicate them. And I'm going to call this one Global Dodge and this one Global Burn. I'm going to fill both of these layer masks with black. And what we're going to do here is some a bigger pass through of a dodge and burn. So what we want to do on this part is deepen some of the shadows that are supposed to naturally be there and call out some of the highlights that are supposed to naturally be there. I like to do this on a separate layer because I'm going a little more broad. I'm going to increase my flow to maybe 6, 7, 8, 9%, somewhere around there. And here, I'm going to increase my brush size. So there's a couple things I want to do. One, I want to deepen the shadow here on Lucy's cheek. I'm going to deepen the shadows on her eyes. Call out some of the shadows around her face. I'm going to do some dodge and burn here on her arm as well. All right, so I'm going to turn my helper layer back on. I'm going to go with less of a contrast here because I'm not trying to even out skin tones. I'm trying to enhance the light. All right, so here I'm just going to paint really gently. Maybe darken her eyebrows a little bit. It's pretty good. Let's go to the dodge, and what we want to do here is call out those highlights. So she's got a nice highlight here on her nose. I'm just going to kind of dot this a little bit. I want to bring out this highlight on her lip, brighten that. I want to try to just get the highlight area, not her whole lip. All right, and let's go do a little bit of work on her arm as well. Honestly, the only reason I'm doing work on her arm is just because I'm evening out the skin tones on her face. I think that her arm should look similar. Otherwise, it might be a little bit unnatural if we spend time editing one part of the body and not the other. I'm not going to do a lot of work here. What I do want to focus on is accentuating the highlight here on her arm and then deepening the shadow below. Okay, really subtle, but I think it looks nice. Okay, awesome. So I think we're good with our dodge and burn. The next thing I'm going to do is add a layer to add color to Lucy's nose and her eyes. So to do that, I'm going to add a solid color. I'm going to choose the color that I want to bring out in our skin tones. We'll start with this pink here. I'm going to rename this layer to eyes and nose. I want to set my mode to multiply. And I'm going to use the blend if layer. And what I want to do here is use Option and click on this triangle here and drag this down to maybe 130 or so. Somewhere right along there. Now I'm going to invert my layer mask. I'm going to use a brush. And I'm going to slowly paint on red around Lucy's nose. Again, I want to use a big soft brush here. Oops. Should lower that opacity probably. Right, and I'm just going to paint here. I think that actually looks really unnatural, so let me undo it. Now I'll try dropping my flow to around 10%, see if that helps out at all. I think this is working much better. Okay, that's looking good-ish. It needs some more adjustments, but we'll come back to that. I'll bring out some redness under her eye as well. Look at how horrible Lucy looks there. I need to bring this red up on her nose a little bit, I think. So that looks blended pretty well. Looks pretty natural, but it's a little bit too intense. Let's try dropping the opacity to 40, maybe 50. That's looking pretty good there. Excellent. Now, the reason I used solid color as my layer type is that if I get the color wrong, or maybe I want to pull out a different color in her skin tones, I can now double click on this, and I can go back and I can make this any color I want. I can make it blue. That doesn't look good at all. I'm going to leave it as red because that's the color that I'm going for. But that's why I chose the solid color. Now we're going to do the same thing. And here I'm going to use this purple. No, not purple. I want to bring out a different shade of red. We're going to make everything the same here. I'm going to use multiply. I'm going to bring the blend if for the underlying layer down to about 130. Invert my layer mask. And now I'm going to paint this right on Lucy's lips. So for this, I actually want this effect to be pretty strong and even. I'm going to use a small brush here. And first I'm going to trace the outline of Lucy's lips. You know what I need to do is turn off the pen pressure opacity. I know this looks horrible. Hang with me for a minute. You see how I'm painting on her lip, but the shadow and highlight underneath is still coming through, so we can still see the texture in her lips, we can still see the highlights. That's what Blend If gets you. So that's why that's a really nice tool. So here, I think I need to even out this over here. All right, so that looks awful, right? But let's just drop that opacity down really low. Maybe like 20%, 30%. Yeah, that looks, nah, we'll go a little bit more. Okay, really subtle. I'm not trying to add lipstick to Lucy. I just want to bring out some of the color in her skin, or in her lips a little bit. And now I think that's good. I think that's our final image. So that's the before and that's the after. Thanks for joining along with the tutorial. I hope you learned something new. We'll see you next time.